Hi everyone, Christina Danforth here with HR Jetpack, and I am super excited to share with you the 2023 SHRM Learning System. Now, if you're an HR Jetpack student, you'll be receiving an email from SHRM to activate your account. Now, once you activate your account, you'll hit a begin button, you'll go through a brief survey, and then you'll be brought to a page that looks like the one in front of you right now. Now, the SHRM Learning System is separated into 4 different components. You have number 1, assess, number 2, study, number 3, pass, and up here in the upper right-hand corner is the main menu. Now, the main menu often gets overlooked as students are starting the program, so I think it's really important to bring your attention to this particular area first before I get into the other components. One thing that I want to point out is that you actually have access to 2 systems. Now, if you're just starting your SHRM certification exam journey, notice that you have the opportunity here to test out questions on each level of the system, whether it's the CP or the SCP. Now, I've found that this helps some of our HR Jetpack students better understand which certification they should apply for. In addition to that, we always recommend that students optimize the entire learning system. You want to be taking as many multiple choice questions as you can leading up to your exam day, and that means using both levels of the system. Now, for those of you that already know which certification you'd like to apply for, of course, I recommend starting off in that particular level. And of course, you can come right up here into the menus and switch over to the other level of the system. One thing I want to note, though, is that if you are in the middle of a quiz or a test, which I'm going to show you in a moment, you cannot move between the levels of the system. You've got to ensure that you X out of that quiz or that test before coming up here into the main menu and trying to move between the levels. Now, you'll notice when you go back to the main page, you can scroll down to the very bottom, and the system will show you which level you are in. Now, let's take a moment to look at the other components of the SHRM Learning System. First and foremost, assess. Now, right here, you'll notice there are a couple of major videos for you to take an opportunity to watch to get you acquainted with the SHRM BASC and also the pretest. You'll have the opportunity to meet your host here, Malia, and she's going to be with you throughout a number of these different videos that I'll point out to you as we move through the system. Now, I want to spend some time specifically talking about the pretest. Absolutely, 100%, one of the first things that we recommend for our HR Jetpack students to do, and for you, if you're going to start your SHRM certification journey, is to take the pretest. The pretest is a 134 multiple choice question exam that is meant to simulate the real exam. You absolutely must start your journey by taking this test, and there's several reasons for that. Number 1, it gives the opportunity to start building your stamina. You might not realize it, but right now you are essentially starting your training for a marathon. And so you have to start practicing, you have to start taking those steps, going into training, and get a feel for what it's like to sit for an exam that's 134 questions long, 3 hours and 40 minutes. A lot like a marathon. So this is where you're going to begin your journey. In addition to that, it is now made up of retired exam questions. So you're actually getting a feel for the real exam. And then finally, the results of the pretest lay the foundation for your study plan. The results from this test are going to tell you your strengths and your opportunities for development in comparison to the SHRM BASC. And in a moment, when we get over into the next section of the SHRM Learning System, you're going to find that there's an area where you can look at a recommended order. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute or two. But this order is also another method for you to follow in terms of your study path. Let me come back to that. But 100% you absolutely have got to take this pretest as you are starting out your journey. And I'll talk about that again in a moment. Now, underneath the pretest, you'll notice that there are several videos here about questions called situational judgment. Now, essentially, there are two major types of questions on the exam: knowledge items and situational judgment items. And as you start your journey, you'll realize that the situational judgment items or questions are the more difficult items on the exam. And so these videos here try to help you work through how best to answer those questions. In fact, we do a lot of that with our students with HR Jetpack as well. In addition, underneath these videos, you'll find an introduction to the SHRM Learning System, also pointing out the SHRM-BASC, in which you could find all the proficiency indicators for every single area, functional area, and competency within the SHRM Learning System. I'm going to touch upon that again, the importance of the proficiency indicators as you're going through your certification journey. It's so important for you to pay attention to those, not only to have a better understanding overall of the SHRM-BASC, but also in relation to the situational judgment items. And you'll know what I mean as you dig deeper into the overall learning system. And finally, over here on the far right-hand side, I want to bring your attention to ACE Your SHRM Certification Exam. This book is a great resource that is full of information about the exam, logistics, test-taking tips. There's even some practice questions in there as well. I highlight this book pretty often overall during our study path with our HR Jetpack students. So I highly recommend that you access this resource, download it, and read it as you are starting your certification journey. Now, this is on number 1. Let's move over to number 2, study. Now, once again, you'll notice at the very top, we've got a couple of videos. Actually, there's 3. And again, they feature your host, Malia, who's going to talk about these particular areas of the SHRM Learning System. Now, I'm going to come back to the personal dashboard in just a moment. But I want to point out to you the content order versus the recommended order. This is associated to the pretest. That's why it's so important for you to take that pretest when you start your journey towards your certification. You have 2 different ways that you can follow through the learning system. Either the actual content order as it's laid out here, you'll notice right on the page, matches up with your textbooks. And also, of course, if you're taking a class, there's a method to follow from the very beginning to the very end. Or there's the recommended order based on your needs. It's all about you. What are your strengths and what are your opportunities for improvement in relation to the SHRM-BASC? In fact, at HR Jetpack, when you join one of our classes, they're all topic-based. So you can jump in anytime you want on any topic, and you can even focus deeper there in that area if it's one of those areas that you need some development or improvement. Or you can follow along with the content as it's laid out here in front of you. So we start with the competencies, moving on to people, organization, and then workplace. And so you'll notice that the format here is very consistent in terms of how each of the modules are laid out in front of you. Now you can begin with the competencies. Interesting part about this. The competencies are mentioned throughout the learning system. The questions on the exam, 50%, 50%, are related to the competencies. So this is a very important area for you to focus on, and it's going to keep coming back as you go through every topic within the SHRM Learning System. Okay, now at this stage, usually I get a couple of really frequently asked questions that students want to find out more about all of these multiple choice questions that we keep talking about. So where are they? Now, I noted the pretest, of course, talked about that. In addition, you will find a quiz. underneath every single module within the learning system. So if you come to leadership and navigation, if you go down to ethical practice, you'll notice that the information is set up within the same format. So the quizzes are located throughout the system, and you can toggle and go back and forth between each of those modules. Now, you'll notice here, before you get to the quiz, are all of the topic groups that are related to leadership and navigation. This is set up the same way as in your textbooks, and also if you were to take an online class. So you'll see that there's a match between all of those particular segments. And then moving on to another very frequently asked question that I get asked, where are the flashcards? There are so many terms and concepts that we need to know when we're preparing for the SHRM certification exam. So the flashcards are located also throughout the system underneath all of the quizzes. In addition to that, I want to bring your attention up here to the menu. If you go over to the Resource Center, you'll find all the flashcards are available for you to download and print. And now another method that I like to share, as I know some of our students have thought that this is a great way to remember all of the terms, is by writing them out themselves. So you could use this as a starting point, and then you can take some time as you're studying to focus on that word and put it in your own way. Put it in your own terms, in terms of how you would best understand what that word is when you see it in a sentence on the exam. Now, something else that I'd like to point out to you up here in the menu is My Progress. In relation to the quizzes, your goal is essentially to be reaching an 80%. Now, when it comes to the pretest, I'm going to take a step back here. I want to ensure that you understand that the pretest is essentially the information that you need to build your study plan. Your overall score doesn't matter. I've gotten notes before from some of our HR Jetpack students who have said, Christina, I did awful on the pretest. Does that mean I'm going to do awful on the final exam? Absolutely not. That is a starting point for you to understand where are your strengths and opportunities for development. You are not striving. Do not retake the pretest in an effort to get an 80% when you are starting your journey. So I just wanted to make one more note about that before I move on. Now with the quizzes, as you're moving through the content, as you're reading, as you're reviewing the information, and you're responding to those quiz questions, you want to aim for an 80%, which is an indication that you have a high level of proficiency in relation to that topic. Remember I mentioned the proficiency indicators? So being proficient is an indication of your expertise in HR and in relation to that particular competency or functional area. So you can come out here and check your progress as you're working through those quizzes. And again, remember, this is a marathon. You are training step by step, going through each segment of this system, and you're going to just get better and better and better. I know it, as you go forward. Next, I'd like to bring your attention to the dashboard. So this is pretty cool. Very nice snapshot of essentially where you are in terms of going through the system. Of course, what do we mention right there at the very top? Malia is reminding you to begin your studies by taking the pretest. Absolutely, 100%. Couldn't agree more, as you know. And you'll see that here. Your next recommended step is to do just that. But of course, as you move forward, as you start going through all of the material, you'll see the levels of completion for each of the modules as you go through them, the competencies, and also, of course, all of the functional areas. So notice that it's all set up in the same order. Now, another cool part that I want to point out to you here at the very bottom is that you can change levels within the system. So You know, in my advice, we tell our students to make sure that they utilize the entire system as they're going through their certification journey. But of course, focus on the certification, the level that you're striving for in terms of your exam day. Now, before I move on to number 3, I'd like to bring your attention back up to the menu. So in addition to the flashcards that I pointed out to you in the Resource Center, I also wanted to point out to you your option to download the textbooks digitally. So this is another popular question that we get. Where can I access the textbooks digitally and download them? And this is exactly where you'll come to download your EPUBs. You just have to hit a particular agreement and then move forward with whatever device you have in terms of accessing those textbooks. In addition to that, I also wanted to point out to you the glossary. Now, besides the digital flashcards and the printable flashcards, we had some of our students who said that they really liked coming to the glossary to go through all of their vocabulary. So you could go through it alphabetically, or you could search for a term and test yourself in that way as well as you're trying to remember all of these terms and concepts. Now, those are some main components about the main menu. Now I'd like to move on to number 3. Almost like you're starting that final stage of your certification journey, pass. So of course, at the top here, we have another explainer video talking about the post-test. So let me spend a little bit of time here. I would say roughly 2 to 3 weeks before your exam date, take the post-test. The post-test is a 67 multiple choice question test that is timed, that starts to help you understand, continue to give you a feel for what it's like to sit for a 3-hour, 40-minute exam. This is your opportunity to identify any of those additional final gaps that you might have in relation to the SHRM-BASC. Now, in addition to that, once you reach 80% or higher, you'll have the opportunity to print off a certificate of achievement. So I know that's important for some folks out there to be able to do that. So 80%, that's your indicator that you're in a pretty good place to sit for the real exam. Next, I want to bring your attention to an absolute must-do. Like the pretest, take the practice exam. And by the way, you have an opportunity to take a post-test and the practice exam twice. You've got different questions on each level of the system. So if you finish everything on one level, move over to the other level because you've got lots of opportunity here to practice. Now let me tell you more about the practice exam. The practice exam is almost like the real deal. And I recommend that you treat it that way in terms of how you approach it, the time that you set aside to take this exam. This exam is made up of retired exam questions. And at the end, you will get a results report. And the results report is going to be just like what you would receive when you're taking your real exam. And it'll give you a high-level overview of how you did in each of the categories. But you cannot go back and look at the questions that you got wrong and read the rationales for the right answer. Now, you can do that with the post-test. The post-test allows you to go in, take a look at what questions you got wrong. But the practice exam is like the real deal. And after having talked with HR Jetpack students who have passed their exams, looking for their thoughts, what their experience was like, and what they did to pass their exam, they took the post-tests and they took the practice exams in the Online Learning Center. So you've got to do that, just like with the pre-test, during your journey. And I estimate, again, depending on where you are in your study path, probably about 2 weeks, maybe 1 week before your actual exam date to take the practice exam and get a feel for that marathon that you're about to run. Now here at the bottom, I'd just like to point out to you a couple of other resources. We also have the SHRM Certification Handbook. Now the handbook has everything in it that you need to know about the exam. So whether it's logistics, fees, timing, policies, procedures, a lot of that is available in the handbook. And finally, we have a quick set of test-taking tips that you might find helpful down here in the lower right-hand corner for you to download. All right, that concludes our tour of the SHRM Learning System for 2023. I'm Christina Danforth with HR Jetpack, and I hope you found this helpful. If you decide to embark on your SHRM certification journey, remember to tell yourself, I will pass my SHRM certification exam.